Hello there, you beautiful people. So in the last video you saw how to redirect standard output, and in this video we're going to be picking that up and continuing by learning how to redirect standard error and standard input. So let's start with standard error. How do you go about redirecting that? Well, standard error works in very much the same way as standard output. Now the number for the standard error data stream is the number 2. So to redirect standard error, you would type cat, and then instead of 1 and then a greater than sign, which is what we use for standard output, you just have a 2. Because the data stream number for standard error is the number 2. And this would redirect the standard error from the cat command to error.txt. And to append the standard error to whatever is already in error.txt, you would do the 2 arrows. So remember, the difference between the 1 arrow and the 2 arrows is the 1 arrow will delete everything that's in the file before writing to it, so it will truncate the file, and 2 arrows will append or add to what's already there. Okay, so let's demonstrate this. The cat command doesn't have the K option. Okay, so if I do cat, give it the K option and just type blur, right, we're going to get an error and it's going to say invalid option K, try cat help for more information. So this is an error message. So therefore it was output on the standard error data stream, and the standard error data stream is by default connected to our terminal, and therefore we see it in our terminal. But let's redirect it to error.txt. So I'm going to press the up arrow key to save myself some typing, and I'm going to type the number 2 and then a greater than sign and say redirect that to error.txt. Okay, so I'm saying run this and redirect the standard error to error.txt. So when I press enter, first of all we notice that nothing popped out on our terminal, which is a good sign. And when we open up our files, we can now see that there's a file called error.txt, and when I open it, we can see that indeed the error message has been sent to that location. A common use for this for redirecting standard error is to keep track of log messages coming from web servers and things like that. But a common mistake is to use just 1 arrow like we have here. Okay, because if I keep doing that, what that means is it will delete what's in the file before it sends standard error again. So if I keep doing that, okay, imagine a new error happens every time. Okay, if I keep doing that and open error.txt, only the most recent error has been saved. But if I, instead of having 1 arrow, I have 2 arrows, now I'm going to append each error on top of each other. Okay, which is exactly what you want with a log file, because you want to be able to scroll back and see what's happened in the past. Okay, so let's open it again. Now we can see that the errors are being added on top of each other. So that's the difference between having the 1 arrow and the 2 arrows. The 2 arrows appends onto what was already there, okay? And that's really what you need for standard error. Now you can, of course, redirect standard error and standard output at the same time. So, for example, we could type the cat command and redirect our output to output.txt. Remember that standard output is data stream number 1. And we could also redirect standard error to another place called error.txt. And we could make sure that we append both of them by making sure there's 2 arrows at both places. And then when we type something like Linux is amazing, and then we cancel, when we open up our file browser here, we will see that we now have 2 files, error.txt and output.txt. Output.txt contains Linux is amazing, and standard error, the error.txt doesn't contain anything because there were actually no errors from this output. It was a perfectly valid command, there were no errors required, but that is how you would go about doing it. So this is how we would be redirecting standard output to output.txt. We can tell that because the number 1 is here, and standard error to a file called error.txt. Now we can see what the number and the arrows that standard error would be appended, and so would output.txt. Now we actually, remember, you actually don't need the 1 for output.txt, so you could actually just do, get rid of that and do, let's say Linux is very amazing. And when I look at that, we're going to see output.txt has had its text appended, and again there will still be no errors in error.txt because there weren't any errors. But you can see here that without using the number 1 this will still work, but you do still need the number 2 for standard error because that shortcut isn't available. Okay, so you can only get rid of the number 1 for the standard output data stream. Okay, brilliant. So you now understand how to redirect standard output and standard error. So how about standard input? Well, actually, that's relatively straightforward. At the moment, the cat command is looking for standard input from the keyboard. But what if we told it to get standard input from a file instead? So let's make a file called input.txt and type in there the words hello world. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the cat command and we're going to output that now to a file called input.txt. Okay, so we're going to make a file, we're going to put in there hello world. Now when I cancel that, we have now effectively created a file called input.txt, and in there we have hello world. Okay, so you can see how you can use redirection to create files like this as well. Now let's try and read from that file using the cat command again. Okay, how can we make the contents of this file, this input.txt file, be read into standard input for the cat command so that we don't have to type it later on, let's say? Well, the standard input stream has the number of 0. So what we can do is we can type cat, then the number 0, and instead of the greater than sign, which is like an output, you actually use the less than sign. Okay, we say then input.txt. Or as a shortcut, because the standard input stream is the only way that you can actually input. You don't even need the 0. You just put the less than sign right there. Now, when we do this, we see the hello world message pop up on the screen. Now this is because cat has read the file from standard input and outputted it to standard output, which is by default connected to our terminal. Now here's a mini challenge, okay? I want you to get cat to read standard input from input.txt and redirect that output to hello.txt and make it so that happens, okay? So go ahead and give that a go. Pause the video now and try to get cat to read standard input from input.txt and redirect the output to hello.txt. Then come back to see how you did. Did you manage it? Well, here's how I would go about it. I would first redirect cat's standard input so that it comes from input.txt. So we're just going to do like that. And then I would output it to a file called hello.txt. Okay. Now, to make it easier to read, I might add the stream numbers. So I might say, okay, I'm going to redirect into stream 0, input.txt, and I'm going to redirect from stream 1, which is standard output, to hello.txt. Okay, it's totally up to you which one you use. This might be a way you do it. It might not be. But just remember that 0 is standard input, 1 is standard output, and 2 is standard error. Okay, and here we can see that we're reading input.txt into standard input. It's quite easy to see that quite graphically, and we're writing from standard output into hello.txt. Okay, so if we go ahead and do that, now we should be able to see that in fact, yes, we now have a file called hello.txt, and when we open it, we see hello world. Isn't that amazing? That's how you can redirect data all around your computer. Now, here's one more mind-blowing thing. Everything in Linux is actually treated the same as a file, even terminals. So let me open up another terminal. I'm going to use the shortcut Control-Alt and T, and I'm going to open them right next to one another. So I'm going to put one over here, and I'm going to put one over here. Okay. Now, in the other terminal, this one over, this new one on the right, I'm going to run the tty command. Now, the tty command will actually tell us where this terminal is located, where on the file system it is. And we see it comes back with /dev/pts/1. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to redirect the content from input.txt, so just like this. And instead of writing it to a file, I'm going to write it to this location, /dev/pts/1. So /dev/pts/1. Okay, and when I press enter, oh my goodness, we can see that the data has been passed from one terminal to another. It's kind of like a really rubbish instant messaging system, right? Now, while this isn't particularly useful in itself, it shows how redirection can be used to pass data around your entire computer and even over computer networks, I've heard. So that's pretty amazing. So how awesome! You now know everything you need to know about redirection in Linux, and the beauty of the Linux system should begin to be making itself clear. Now, as a quick recap, you learned that standard input, standard output, and standard error are streams of data, and like normal water streams, their flow comes from somewhere and goes to somewhere. Redirection is all about controlling that where. Using redirection, you can control where standard output and standard error streams go, and you can control where standard input comes from. You also learned that these data streams have numbers associated with them. Standard input is stream number 0, standard output is stream number 1, and standard error is stream number 2. You then learned about the different symbols that can be used for redirection. They are basically the greater than and less than signs. Just remember that if you're redirecting output, one greater than sign means that the file will be erased or truncated before you write to it. So if you don't want to lose the data that's in there, make sure to use two greater than signs to append data to the file. In other words, add data to what's already there. Now, there are a few more cool things that you can do with redirection, but they're less common than what you've learned in these last few videos. So if you're curious, I've put a link where you can learn more about redirection in the lecture resources. But one question that must be burning in your head right now is, how can I redirect the output from one command to the input of another? Surely there must be a way. Well, that process is known as piping, and it is in my opinion that's the crown jewel of the Linux command line. Piping is probably the most important thing that the command line lets you do, because it takes all of the commands that do one thing very, very, very well and allows you to tie them together seamlessly to do basically anything that you want. Mastering piping will definitely give you superpowers, so to master the power of piping and gain superpowers, I'll see you in the next video.